I've been driving for Lyft for almost 5 years now, and I can tell you, the night shift is a different beast. The money's good, the roads are quiet, but every now and then you get a ride that sticks with you, one that makes you rethink why you ever signed up for this in the first place. That night started off like any other. It was late November, the kind of cold that settles into your bones no matter how high you crank the heat. My car, an old but reliable 2010 Honda Accord, hummed along the empty streets of Portland, the city bathed in the orange glow of dim streetlights. I had just dropped off a drunk couple at their apartment downtown when my phone buzzed with another request. Pickup location: edge of the city, an abandoned parking lot near an old industrial district. I hesitated. Normally, I stick to busier areas, bars, airports, late-night diners. But the fares had been slow, and I wasn't about to turn down an easy ride. Besides, it was just another passenger. What's the worst that could happen? As I pulled up to the location, something felt wrong. The lot was nearly pitch black, save for the pale flickering of a dying street lamp at the far end. There were no other cars, no movement, just empty asphalt and the distant hum of the freeway. At first, I thought I had the wrong spot. I double-checked the app. No, this was it. The timer had started, meaning the passenger was nearby. I scanned the area and finally spotted him. A tall, lanky figure emerged from behind a crumbling concrete barrier. He moved with an odd, jerky stiffness, like his body wasn't used to walking properly. As he stepped into the weak glow of my headlights, I got my first good look at him. He was wearing a faded hoodie, stained and frayed at the edges, with the hood pulled up so low I could barely see his face. What little I could see wasn't reassuring. His skin looked sickly pale, stretched tight over sharp cheekbones, and his lips were cracked like he hadn't had water in days. But it was his eyes, wide, unblinking, dark as the void, that set off every alarm in my head. Everything in me screamed, "Don't let him in." But before I could make a decision, he was already at the door, reaching for the handle. I hesitated. Just a second. Just long enough for the thought to cross my mind, to hit the gas and leave him standing there in the dark. But I didn't. I unlocked the doors. He slid into the back seat, the scent of stale sweat and something else, something metallic, drifting into the cabin. I cleared my throat. "Hey, how's your night going?" Silence. I glanced at the rearview mirror. He was staring at me. Not at his phone. Not out the window. Directly at me. My fingers tightened on the wheel. You got a destination in mind?" He finally spoke. His voice was deep, rasping, like he hadn't used it in a while. "Just drive." I forced a chuckle, pretending that didn't make every hair on my body stand on end. "Yeah, man, I kind of need an address. That's how this works." He didn't react, just slowly pulled out his phone and tapped something into the app. A second later, my GPS updated. Destination: a desolate stretch of road just outside the city. Red flag number 2. But I'd already accepted the ride, and canceling now would mean stopping the car, so I put it in drive and rolled out of the lot. For the first few minutes, the only sounds were the soft hum of the engine and the occasional rattle from my loose dashboard panel. Most passengers either scrolled on their phones or stared out the window. Not this guy. He kept watching me, unmoving, unblinking. I tried to focus on the road, but every few seconds, my eyes flicked to the mirror. Each time, he was still staring. It felt like a game, like he was waiting to see how long it would take for me to brake. I clicked on the radio, just to fill the silence. The moment the music started, his hand shot forward, gripping the headrest of my seat. "Turn it off." His voice was sharper this time, more urgent. My heart skipped a beat. I switched it off without argument. His fingers lingered on the headrest for a second too long before he slowly pulled back. I swallowed hard and focused on the GPS. Another 15 minutes to the drop-off. Just get him there and get him out of the car. Then he spoke again. "You ever pick up someone you shouldn't have?" I let out a strained laugh. "I mean, I hope not." "No," he murmured, almost to himself. "I mean, someone really bad." I didn't answer. He leaned back, muttering something under his breath, words too quiet for me to catch. I kept my eyes forward, pulse pounding in my ears. Then, suddenly, he sat up straighter, eyes locking onto something outside. I followed his gaze. A pair of headlights in the distance. A police car. Without warning, my passenger slid down in his seat, almost lying flat in the back. My blood turned to ice. I knew right then that I had made a mistake. A big one. The cop car crept closer, its spotlight sweeping lazily across the road. I tightened my grip on the wheel, trying to keep my breathing steady. The man in my back seat whispered, barely audible, "If you stop this car, we're both dead." I don't know why, but I believed him. I kept driving. The patrol car passed without slowing, its red and blue lights fading into the night. I exhaled, only then realizing I'd been holding my breath. My passenger stayed curled up for an uncomfortably long time before finally sitting back up. He adjusted his hoodie, then looked at me through the mirror again. He smiled, a slow, eerie grin that sent a chill down my spine. "You got lucky," he said. Then he turned his gaze back to the road, as if nothing had happened. And we kept driving into the night. The silence stretched between us, thick and suffocating. The city lights had faded into the distance, replaced by the looming shadows of trees lining the empty road. The only sound was the steady hum of my engine, a dull backdrop to the tension crackling in the air. I didn't know why, but I felt like I was being hunted. The man in my back seat hadn't moved much since he last spoke. He just sat there, his fingers lightly tapping against the fabric of his hoodie. I could see him in the rearview mirror, watching me with that same vacant, unnerving stare. Every now and then, he'd glance over his shoulder, as if expecting something or someone to be following us. I wanted to break the silence, wanted to crack a joke, ask him about his destination, anything to make this feel normal. But something in my gut told me to keep my mouth shut. Then after what felt like forever, he spoke again. "Take the next right." I flicked my eyes to the GPS. No right turn was indicated. That's not the route," I said, trying to keep my voice even. He didn't answer right away. Instead, he exhaled slowly, then repeated, "Take the next right." This time, there was an edge to his voice, a quiet insistence that made my pulse quicken. I swallowed hard, my hands tightening around the steering wheel. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest, an erratic drumbeat against my ribs. Every nerve in my body screamed at me to not take that turn, but I did. The road narrowed almost instantly, the pavement giving way to gravel and dirt. Tall trees loomed overhead, their gnarled branches casting eerie shadows in my headlights. The deeper we went, the more it felt like we were being swallowed whole by the darkness. A thought hit me then, cold and sharp. No one knows where I am. I never told anyone about this ride. If something happened, if I disappeared, no one would even know where to start looking. I clenched my jaw, forcing myself to breathe evenly. Stay calm. I couldn't let him see how rattled I was. "Where exactly are we going?" I asked, keeping my tone light, casual. No answer. I chanced a glance in the mirror. He was still watching me, still eerily still. Then ever so slowly he smiled, a slow, deliberate grin that sent an icy chill crawling up my spine. "You ever hear of liminal spaces?" he asked. I blinked. Like those weird in-between places? Empty malls, abandoned roads? His grin widened. "Yeah, places that feel like they shouldn't exist. But they do." Something about the way he said it made my skin crawl. "And?" I asked. He turned his head slightly, looking out the window. "Some people think they're just odd little pockets of reality. But others believe there's something more." I kept driving, the trees pressing in closer, the road growing rougher. "What do you believe?" I asked, even though I wasn't sure I wanted to know the answer. For a moment, he didn't respond. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, he said, "I believe once you enter one, you don't always come back." A shiver ran through me. I forced a laugh, hoping to lighten the mood. "That's supposed to be a warning?" His gaze snapped back to me through the mirror, his smile vanishing. "No," he said softly. "It's a fact." I didn't know what to say to that, so I said nothing. The road stretched endlessly ahead, no signs, no houses, just the void of the forest. My gut twisted with unease. How far was I supposed to drive? I licked my lips, trying to keep my voice steady. "Hey man, I think I should probably stop the car." I froze. His voice was different now, sharper, commanding. I gripped the wheel. "Why? Just stop." Everything in me screamed, "Don't do it." But my body betrayed me. My foot eased off the gas, and the car rolled to a stop on the side of the dirt road. Silence. The air felt different, thicker, heavier, like the world itself was holding its breath. He shifted in the back seat. I saw him move his hand slowly into his hoodie pocket. My pulse skyrocketed. A weapon. He has a weapon. I forced myself to sound calm. Look, man, if you need to get out here, that's fine. I'll just chill. I swallowed my words. His head turned slightly, as if he was listening to something outside the car. His breathing had changed, shallow, controlled. Then, in a whisper, he asked, "Do you hear it?" A cold wave of fear rolled through me. Hear what? He didn't answer. The trees outside swayed slightly, but there was no wind. The world was deathly silent. Then a sound, faint at first, distant, almost like whispers. My blood ran cold. I turned my head slightly, staring out into the darkness. Nothing, just trees and shadows. The man in the back seat exhaled, his voice barely audible. "It found us." My stomach twisted into knots. "What the hell are you talking about?" He leaned forward slightly, his voice urgent now. "Drive. Now." I hesitated. Then a flicker of movement in the trees. My heart lurched into my throat. Something was out there, watching. The whispering grew louder, layered, multiple voices overlapping, speaking in tongues I didn't understand. I slammed my foot on the gas. The tire spun against the dirt before catching traction, and the car lurched forward. The man in the back didn't move, didn't react, just kept watching out the window as the voices grew fainter behind us. For miles, we said nothing. Then finally I saw it. A sign. Civilization. The road opened back up to a stretch of highway. The distant glow of streetlights in the distance. Relief flooded me, so hard I nearly laughed. I slowed the car slightly, my hands still shaking. What the hell was that? The man in the back seat didn't answer right away. Then, finally, he leaned forward, his breath chillingly close. "You shouldn't have stopped." My skin prickled. "What?" He shook his head, sitting back again. "Just keep driving." I did. But as I glanced one last time into the mirror, my stomach dropped. For the first time since he got in the car, he wasn't looking at me anymore. He was looking out the back window, like he was waiting for something to follow. The highway stretched ahead, empty and endless, swallowed in the eerie glow of my headlights. The city lights shimmered faintly in the distance, but they felt impossibly far away, like a mirage, like I'd never actually reached them. My hands were locked onto the steering wheel, my knuckles bone white. I had the radio off, the windows up, the heat cranked just enough to keep my fingers from going numb. But no amount of warmth could stop the cold that had settled in my chest. I glanced in the rearview mirror. The man in my back seat wasn't looking at me anymore. He was watching the road behind us. His posture had shifted, muscles tense beneath the ragged fabric of his hoodie. His jaw was set, his fingers tapping rhythmically against his knee. It wasn't the kind of nervous energy I'd seen in drunk passengers or the twitchy guys who had had a little too much caffeine. This was something else, like he was waiting, or worse, like he was bracing for something. The silence was unbearable. I had to break it. I cleared my throat. "So, are you going to tell me what the hell just happened?" He didn't answer. I forced a laugh, trying to sound casual. "Look, man, I don't know if you're trying to freak me out, but it's still following." My stomach dropped. I gripped the wheel tighter. "What?" His voice was low, almost a whisper. "You don't see it yet, but it's there." I didn't want to look. I really didn't want to look. But something in my brain, it was primal, instinctual, told me I had to. Slowly, I flicked my eyes to the mirror. At first, there was nothing, just darkness, broken only by the occasional flash of my taillights bouncing off the asphalt. Then, something moved. Not a car, not an animal. Something tall, too tall. It didn't run. It didn't walk. It glided, like a smear across the fabric of reality, shifting in and out of the darkness. I sucked in a sharp breath. My hands locked onto the wheel, so tight I could feel my pulse pounding through my fingertips. No, that's not real. I blinked hard. When I looked again, nothing. Just an empty road stretching into the void behind us. I let out a shaky laugh. Okay, I don't know what the hell that was, but you saw it. His voice was calm. Flat, like he already knew the answer. I swallowed hard. You saw it. It wasn't a question. I didn't answer. Because I had. I licked my lips, my throat suddenly dry. Okay, you know what? Screw this. I reached for my phone. I'm calling the cops. The second my thumb hovered over the screen, his voice sharpened. Don't! A chill shot through me. I turned to look at him, my pulse hammering in my ears. What? His jaw was tight. His hands clenched into fists. If you call them, he said slowly, they won't help you. My fingers hovered over my phone screen. They won't even make it here. My stomach twisted. What the hell does that mean? He exhaled, shaking his head. You don't understand. It doesn't just follow. His voice dropped lower. It listens. Something about the way he said it made my blood turn to ice. I let go of my phone like it had burned me. For a long moment, we sat in silence, the highway stretching ahead, empty and cold. Then, barely above a whisper, he said, Don't acknowledge it again. I swallowed hard. What happens if I do? He didn't answer. I didn't ask again. The car felt smaller, the air heavier. My own breathing sounded too loud in my ears. I tried to focus on the road, on the safety of the city lights in the distance. Just keep driving. Just get him to his stop and forget this ever happened. But deep down, I knew this ride wasn't going to end the way I wanted it to. For a while, the only sound was the low hum of the engine. Then, without warning, my passenger sat up straighter. His head turned slightly, his gaze flicking to the window. His breathing changed, faster, shallower, like he was preparing for something. Every muscle in my body tensed. What? I asked, barely keeping my voice steady. He didn't answer. Instead, he slowly turned his head toward me. And for the first time, I saw something in his expression that made my skin crawl. Fear. Real, unmistakable fear. I opened my mouth, but before I could say anything, the streetlights flickered. Once, twice, then darkness. The highway went completely black. My headlights should have been enough, but somehow they weren't. The road ahead looked wrong, like it was stretching, twisting, warping into something unfamiliar. The world outside the car no longer looked real. I slammed my foot on the gas. The car lurched forward, tires screeching against the pavement. My pulse was a drumbeat in my skull. What the hell is happening? My passenger didn't answer. He was looking straight ahead now, his entire body rigid, his hands gripping his knees. Then softly he whispered, It knows we see it. A shiver shot down my spine. And then, behind us, a noise. Faint at first, like a whisper carried on the wind. Then louder. A low, guttural, inhuman sound. Something was in the road, behind us. I knew, somehow, that if I looked in the mirror again, I would see it. I didn't want to see it. I pressed the gas pedal to the floor. The speedometer climbed 60, 70, 80 miles per hour. My heart was about to punch through my rib cage. I didn't care about cops. I didn't care about speed limits. I just needed to get away. Then, a thump. Something hit the roof of the car. I screamed. The man in the back seat sucked in a sharp breath. The weight shifted, something dragging itself across the roof. The car shuddered. I barely kept control. What the hell is that? His voice was tight. Don't! Stop! I wasn't planning on it. I gritted my teeth, forcing my focus back to the road. The city was so close now. Then, a shadow darted in front of the car. I swerved hard. Tires screeched. The car skidded, nearly spinning out before I yanked the wheel back under control. The weight on the roof vanished. The whisper stopped. The darkness lifted. And then, just like that, the city lights were right in front of us. I pulled off the highway, shaking so hard I could barely breathe. For a long time, neither of us spoke. Then finally my passenger exhaled. You made it. I turned to look at him, and froze. His seat was empty. No door had opened. No sound of movement. Just gone. My breath hitched in my throat. I whipped my head around, scanning the back seat. Nothing. No trace of him. No lingering scent. Nothing to prove that he had ever been there in the first place. But I knew. I knew he had been there. My hands trembled against the steering wheel. The city lights ahead of me felt distant, unreal, like they belonged to another world. one that I wasn't sure I'd ever get back to. The car was still rolling forward, slow and aimless. I didn't even remember easing off the gas. I forced myself to breathe, gripping the wheel so tight my knuckles went numb. Think, stay rational. I pulled over into the first gas station I saw. The bright neon lights flickered above me, casting jittery shadows across the cracked pavement. I put the car in park and just sat there, heart pounding, mind spinning. Where did he go? What the hell just happened? I reached for my phone, desperate for some sense of normalcy, but my fingers were slick with sweat. I fumbled, almost dropping it. When I finally got a grip, I saw the time, 3:13 a.m. It felt like I had been driving for hours. But my shift had started at 1 a.m. This ride? It had only been 30 minutes. I swallowed hard, opened the Lyft app. The ride was still active. My stomach lurched. The screen showed that the destination was still another 0.2 miles ahead. I hadn't reached the drop-off point, but he was already gone. I stared at the screen, my vision blurring at the edges. Every instinct in me screamed, end the ride, close the app, go home, but my fingers wouldn't move. Because deep down, I knew I wasn't done yet. I don't know why I did it. Maybe I was still in shock. Maybe some part of me needed answers. But I put the car back in drive, and I followed the GPS. The destination took me through the outer edge of the city, where the streetlights flickered less frequently, where old buildings slumped against each other like they'd given up. The roads were empty. Not just quiet, empty. No other cars, no pedestrians. Just me, the road, and that damn blinking arrow on my screen. Turn right. Go straight. Another right. The city faded behind me, replaced by a stretch of road that looked eerily familiar. My pulse quickened. I was heading back toward the woods. I pulled up to the destination, a rundown gas station. Not the one I had stopped at before. This one was different, older, abandoned. The windows were covered in grime. The fluorescent sign was shattered, half the letters missing. The pavement was cracked and overgrown with weeds. My stomach twisted. I checked the screen again. Drop OFF location reached. But there was no one there. I turned off the engine, my breath fogging up the windshield. The silence was deafening. And then, knock, knock, knock. I nearly jumped out of my skin. The sound came from the passenger window. Slow, rhythmic, too steady. I turned my head, heart slamming against my ribs. There was no one there. The window was fogged from the cold, but I could see just enough to know that nothing was standing outside. I swallowed hard. Then, knock, knock, knock. This time it came from the back. I spun around so fast I nearly gave myself whiplash. Still nothing. The back seat was empty, but the door was unlocked. My throat closed. I knew I had locked it. I always locked it. My shaking hand reached for the door lock. Then, a whisper from the back seat. Right, behind me. You shouldn't have come back. My body seized up. Every nerve in me screamed run, drive, move, but I couldn't. I couldn't even breathe. The air in the car turned ice cold. I forced myself to turn, and I saw it. Not my passenger. Something else. A shadowy figure, sitting exactly where he had been before. I couldn't see its face. Couldn't see anything except the shape of a human form, dark and unmoving, like the absence of light itself. It tilted its head slightly, as if studying me. Then it leaned forward and whispered again, "It knows you now." Something inside me snapped. I slammed my foot onto the gas pedal. The tires screeched against the pavement. The engine roared, and the car shot forward. I didn't care where I was going. I just needed to get away. The gas station disappeared in my rearview mirror, swallowed by the darkness. I didn't look back. I couldn't, because deep down I knew. If I did, I'd see it again. I don't remember how I got home. The next thing I knew, I was parked in front of my apartment, my body stiff, my throat raw. The sun was just beginning to rise. I checked my phone. The ride had disappeared. Not completed, not canceled, just gone, like it had never existed. I got out of the car on shaky legs, forcing myself to breathe. The city around me was waking up, oblivious to what had just happened, to what I had seen. I went inside, locked every door, pulled the curtains shut, and sat there in silence. That was 2 weeks ago. I haven't driven since. I don't know if I ever will again. But the worst part? The thing that keeps me awake at night? It's not the fear. It's not the memories. It's the feeling that something is still with me. Watching. Waiting. Because sometimes, late at night, when everything is quiet, I hear a sound. Soft. Rhythmic. Too steady. Knock. Knock. Knock.